All right, ladies and gentlemen, those are the headlines, and let's now put the spotlight on IPO segment. India's initial public offering market continues to demonstrate resilience, securing a 22% share of the global IPO activity in the first quarter of 2025. And that's according to a report, IPO Trends report by Ernst & Young. In fact, the study also claims that with 62 IPOs raising a total of $2.8 billion, India remains a leading destination for companies that are seeking to go public, even as there is a backdrop of global market uncertainties as well. In fact, according to the report, India has secured a 22% share of the global IPO activity in the first quarter of 2025. With 62 IPOs having raised $2.8 billion, and that showcases continued interest from investors. To take us through more details of that report and, of course, what to make of the IPO segment, where are we headed in terms of growth, in terms of interest from investors, and will it be bullish from here on? What does the road to IPOs look like for several segments? We're now joined by Prashant Singhal, the partner IPO and markets leader at Ernst & Young India. Thank you very much, Prashant, for joining us here on ET Now.
Thanks, Sumita. Really great to be here and talk about the IPO story in India. Go ahead, Sumita, you want to...
Right. So, Prashant, let me first ask you, because 2025 actually has been marked with uncertainty, there's heightened volatility. How has that translated for global as well as Indian IPO market segments so far as the first 3 months of this year are concerned? And if you could give us a comparative analysis of how the West has performed, specifically this IPO segment, Europe, Southeast Asia, and particularly India.
Yeah, so, Sumita, the overall IPO market, I think you had the numbers on the screen as well, has shown an increase of about 3% when it comes to the number of IPOs and 20% when it comes to the proceeds from the IPOs. And if you see the US market or the Americas markets, I mean, that's the one which has registered a fairly large percentage of the growth in terms of number of IPOs. It's gone up from 41 last year, same time to almost 62 this year, and same time. Asia Pac has seen a negative growth of about 2% in terms of number of IPOs, 118 to 116. And EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and India, has got a negative 9% of 124 to 113. Whilst the proceeds of IPOs, apart in Asia Pac has seen a larger growth. In fact, that's gone up by almost 87%, doubling from 5.8 billion to 10.9 billion. US has remained flat, and EMEA is negative. So we've seen a lot of activity on Asia Pac in terms of larger IPOs, whereas the number of IPOs have come down marginally there. I think there are a lot of, the overall IPO market, I think it actually should have shown an increase, but for the global uncertainty, which is the entire trade situation that we are all dealing with. I think once that gets settled, we'll see a much larger growth, because there's a lot of money which is available on the sidelines, and there is a lot of interest now on companies which are getting onto the AI side. In the US, you see that's being a very interested segment. You also see an interested segment of defense and aerospace, especially because of the tariffs. I think there's a lot of movement which is going to happen that side. So we should see that. And coming back to India, I think the 62 IPOs that you talk about, I mean, in India, we've seen a negative growth when it comes to the number of IPOs. It's moved down from 82 same time last year to 62.
Right.
And the proceeds have marginally remained the same. It's actually gone up from 2.5 to 2.8 billion.
Right.
The number in India is a bit skewed because of the SME IPOs. On the main board, of course, there has been some good IPOs and a few in the offing as well. Hexaware is one of the largest ones which has come in.
Right, Prashant. So I'm going to touch upon some of these very interesting points that you have mentioned with respect to the India IPO story is concerned. The fact that, the number of IPOs have seen a downgrade. In fact, that number has reduced. But when you say that Indian IPO market has registered a 3% increase, the United States, on the other hand, has registered a 62% increase. Now, what do you think is responsible for that kind of growth that the US market has seen? It's come from somewhere in the 40% range to now in the over 60% range, despite the fact there's been uncertainty in the US economy itself on account of Donald Trump's tariffs.
I mean, it's the number of IPOs. So the number of IPOs in the US has gone up from 41 in terms of absolute numbers to 62. And the reason, whereas when you see the proceeds have only gone up by 2%, whereas the number has gone up by almost 50%. So there are smaller companies which are coming in, getting listed, and that's what I was just talking about. When AI, and a lot of these are TMT companies, with AI being really, some of the startups which were there on the AI side has got listed. You'll see that's about 15 of the IPOs. You'll see health sciences, which have got 14 of the IPOs. So sectorally, you are seeing the healthcare sector, the TMT sector, seeing a lot of traction in the US IPO market, and the aerospace and the defense, the ones which don't get really impacted with the tariff war. And eventually, the ones who are not dependent upon a lot of the imports are the ones which are still going public, and that's really the ones which have grown the numbers. It also is a result of how the companies have prepared themselves for the IPO. So if you were to see the last quarter of 2024, which is a calendar quarter, US had almost 60 IPOs. And that number has gone up from 60 to 62. So it's not on a quarter-on-quarter basis. It's not a 50% jump, but it's kind of maintained itself. Whereas the proceeds have gone up substantially in this quarter. So as I said, it's to do really with some of the sectors which are gaining traction, and then some of the sectors which are not seeing too much of activity.
Right.
But if you were to just continue with the run rate growth, that is kind of
right.
tapered
So
off.
Prashant, very interesting analysis. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so run rate growth has tapered off, and expectedly so. But when you talk about the US markets, I mean, US policy shifts is clearly favoring some sectors, like you said, more than others. That is defense, manufacturing, technology, aerospace, along with a bevy of other segments. Globally, how is this still different from what's happening right here in India?
I think India has taken a bit of a halt, if I were to say, right? I mean, there are companies which are really dependent upon tariffs, and are dependent upon exports. So at this stage, for companies like those to go in the market will be tough, and that's the reason why you see somebody like an Ather still going in the market, because the demand is not really driven by global demand. They don't really look at exports, and it's more like domestic demand. And then you're seeing some of the others which are filed, which is the urban company. On the other side, you've seen LG, which had announced a fairly large listing of almost 15,000 crores and has deferred that, and that's because it gets driven by the global supply chain. So I think wherever there is a global impact, either on the supply chain side or on the export side, I think the India market will see an impact. Whereas where the companies which are not getting impacted by those are the ones which are going to come in. The other thing which is unfortunate that happened, which we all we're all really, really sad about, is what happened in Kashmir the other day, and that also creates a bit of tension within the markets, and then companies thinking about going for an IPO or not. But what we have seen is that there's a preparation of companies who want to go for an IPO that has not stopped. So there are companies who are getting ready for an IPO. They're going to wait for the right time. There are over 150 DRHPs which are with SEBI for approval. So it's not that the activities is really coming down. I think people are going to get ready, going to wait for the right window in the market, and then go and launch the issues.
Absolutely, Prashant. And you do have seen a bunch of IPOs. There is some caution being exercised in the IPO market, and in fact, ET now has also reported that LG could probably be looking at delaying its IPO. So is that the outlook that you have for the rest of the quarter? And what are you anticipating for this particular year in terms of IPO growth and IPO activity right here? What are the valuations that you're seeing? Will valuations probably take a hit? What is it that you're anticipating for the rest of the year and, of course, for the coming quarter?
The coming quarter really depends upon the how the entire tariff situation evolves. I think that's going to have a big impact on the IPO market in the coming quarter. I think on the year side, I think we'll certainly see activity. I don't think we're going to continue with the similar activity, which means the cautious activity, but we'll see a growth activity on the IPO market. As I said, there are a lot of companies which are waiting, and they have to and they want to get listed, because there is also an acceptability in the Indian markets of a lot of digital first companies, and we have seen that in the past. So a lot of such companies, and I think your show covers a lot of them, which is a Startup Central, are waiting to be listed. So we should see activity picking up in maybe Q3 calendar, moving up further on Q4. Q2 would be slightly subdued because of the overall, and we are already like 1 month into the Q2, so we would see some level of subdued activity in this quarter. But clearly, Q3, Q4, we should see growth back into the India markets.
So you are quite bullish as far as growth getting back into the India markets is concerned. But which sectors are you most bullish about in terms of the number of issues and, of course, from a volumes perspective?
Yeah, I think as I said, the digital first companies could see a lot of growth. The companies which don't really get or could see listing, the companies which are profitable, they would certainly be interested in listing. The stories about companies who are looking at valuation based on sales, I think those are not acceptable to the investors. And then the ones which are dependent upon the supply chain, the global supply chain, they may just need to get more certainty before they get in. So just in terms of sectors, technology sector, for example, is a good sector. Financial services would be a good sector. I mean, consumer electronics or electronic manufacturing just depends upon the way the overall tariff situation emerges, but can be a great sector or can be a sector which may take some time to just stabilize. So healthcare would be a good sector, pharma would be a good sector. So we'll see activity across, as I said, most of the sectors where the supply chains don't get impacted.
Right. And Prashant, since you mentioned about Ather and we are talking about IPOs, let me also bring our guests up to speed with subscription numbers. It is day 3 of subscription for the Ather IPO. And as of 5:50 p.m., QIBs subscribed by 1.7x, NIIs by 0.66x, RIIs by 1.78x, and of course, employees by over 5.43x. So total number of subscriptions is overall to the tune of 1.43x. But let me also talk to you about from a China perspective. Now, between the United States and China, Prashant, for instance, there is no visibility of probably a truce that's happening on the trade war front. However, it is China that has made some concessions. Donald Trump is saying that United States will be engaging with China. So there are some indications, some initial signals of a possible truce between both the sides. But at the same time, you do have DeepSeek in the country, which has revitalized investor interest. But given the trade-related concerns that investors may have on the economic front, how is China placed so far as the country's IPO market is concerned?
I think the activity in China, I think we all know, and I'm not really very, very close to China, honestly, but the activity in China is, I mean, I think it's something that is going up and it should go up. Again, that was driven a lot by the domestic consumption, but a large part of it was dependent upon exports. But if you see the trade and the bilateral trade numbers, I think it's really the two geographies may not be able to do without them. So the truce at some point in time may happen, and we could see a lot more economic and IPO activity in China. China, of course, is also far ahead when it comes to technology. So we can see a lot more technology companies IPOing there. And it's when we talk about China, it's largely Hong Kong, right? I mean, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So we'll certainly see that coming in. While some numbers in Q1, as I talked about, have come down in terms of the number of IPOs, but there's been the proceeds of IPOs in that region of Asia Pacific has seen an 87% jump, which is almost at 11 billion. So I think the activity is still very robust there in terms of the size and scale of the IPOs. The numbers may come down.
All right, so the numbers may come down. The China market could get some bit of an impact, but you stay bullish so far as the India market is concerned, although some near-term impact could be anticipated and expected. But on that note, thank you very much, Prashant, for taking the time out and speaking to us right here on ET Now on this